We are going to begin with a thought experiment. Rhetorical, a thought experiment, okay? Goes something like this. You're in a coffee shop or a restaurant. I'll let you choose where. Okay, got it? Coffee shop, restaurant. A dad is sitting, he's quietly reading. Could be a book, could be a tablet, could be his phone, could be a newspaper. And his teen son is sitting beside him. Now, his teen son is obviously glued to his phone. So, coffee shop, restaurant, dad's reading, teen glued to his phone. The dad reaches for his latte just as the boy elbows it and knocks it over. Okay? Coffee everywhere. Hot coffee everywhere. And the dad jumps up and his pants are soaked and he takes a deep breath and he says, it's rhetorical. It's rhetorical. How does that story end in your imagination? How do you fill in the end of the story? Here's the key. Your brain will do that work, right? For many of you, you jump to him saying something, you jump to some type of action, and it finishes and fills in the rest of the story based on what you already believe about dads and about teenagers and about coffee and about maybe even something from your own experience. Now imagine if I gave you even a little bit more context, right? Maybe the boy, when he was looking at his phone, was laughing. Or maybe he was crying. Or maybe this was the third time something like this has happened in as many days. Your story in your mind changes, right? As you get more context, as you get more details. So here's the point I want to make, and Tom has already alluded to it. We often make choices. Maybe we always make choices based on what we think are facts, but are really interpreted through stories that are already running through our minds. Stories about how the world works, about what people are like, and about what really matters. So while we make a decision, we might think we're basing it on, these are my choices. We've already factored in a ton of other things based on the stories and the scripts that are running through my mind. Now, I'm going to say something, it might be a little controversial, but I hope you'll stick with me. In my 20s, when I first started ministry, when I first started kind of formally training for this role, I was taught that Christianity, at least as certain voices explained it, offered a complete way to understand everything. History, science, politics, culture, and human nature. Over time, though, I learned that this worldview, this Christian worldview, often seemed less focused on truth and more focused on protecting power. It promised that the ultimate answer key was available, but sometimes it felt like it was just really good at circling its own wagons. What had been framed as faith began to feel more like ideology, one that explained everything but rarely questioned itself. Church, when religion turns rigid, it loses its soul. At its best, faith is not interested in mastering reality. That's not faith. That's control. Healthy religion, healthy spiritual practices, healthy spiritual rhythms, they don't begin with a concrete worldview with everything sorted in nice, tidy boxes. It doesn't begin with control or with certainty. It begins with story. Because story doesn't force belief, and stories aren't supposed to offer easy answers. In fact, I believe, and I'm a bit biased, but I believe that great stories should challenge how we see the world and ourselves. When a story is trusted, it forms people through practice and community built around that story, shaping our conscience, our imagination, our humility, and our love without pretending that we have to settle on every answer or answer every question. So, every choice we make tells a story about what we believe the world is like. Have you ever met somebody that was just nauseatingly optimistic? And you just couldn't get there? Some of you are in this room, and I love you to death, and I don't know how you do it. We've already explored the idea that I'm quite a realist/pessimist. Underneath the story of our choices, underneath every decision we make, is the story of what we believe the world is like. But I believe there's also something deeper running underneath the choices that we make, which is what kind of life and what kind of world are we trying to build together? Every choice we make should reveal and does reveal the answer to this question. What kind of life and what kind of world are we trying to build together? Every relationship we form, every group we join, every school, every team, every community or cause that we support, every story humans hold on to is really about the same thing. And I think we gravitate to those places and those people because we desire a world that works. A world where people can trust each other. That would be wonderful. A world where our work feels meaningful, right? I think we're made to work. We're made to be creative, but sometimes our work just feels like work. Where we take care of the earth and where we don't live in constant fear of losing our place, our value, or our future. We want a world that works, and at the same time, most of us know that the world doesn't really feel that way. Things fall apart. Friendships and families struggle, people die, and systems fail. Violence and fear seem to be everywhere, and to protect ourselves, we build walls around our hearts. We harden ourselves against better stories. Over time, this can make it easy to shut down emotionally and stop caring as deeply as we used to. We get jaded, and we settle for smaller, weaker stories that help us cope, but don't provide any real lasting healing or change. So over the next 5 weeks, we will explore together the story of God's faithfulness. Not to control our fears or acquire all the answers, not to explain everything perfectly or explain everything away, but as a way to spark our imagination and shape who we are. And as we do this, I invite you to trust that this story that culminates in Jesus' story is the story that saves. Even when, and perhaps because, it challenges us to rethink our lives and our place in the world. Now, I'll probably come back to this over the course of this, but I just want to say this at the beginning. To explore this story honestly, especially in a world where the Christian story has been repeatedly reshaped by empire and inequality and power, I want us to keep a few questions in the back of our mind. When we're talking about the story of God's faithfulness, we need to ask some questions like, who benefits from the way this story has been told? And who has been silenced by the way that this story has been told? And as we tell the story together, what parts become louder? What parts do we celebrate? And what parts become quieter, depending on how we tell the story? So let's start where every good story starts, in the beginning. In the Bible, in the chronicle of God's faithfulness, it doesn't start with a systematic theology. Okay? I have like 5 of those in my office, if you want all of them. It doesn't start with a systematic theology, teaching us how to live with God or with one another or the earth. It's not interested. Genesis is not primarily, first and foremost, interested in answers. It's interested in our imagination. how we see the world and our place in it. When God began to create the heavens and the earth was complete chaos, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said. Creation unfolds in the opening story of Genesis with rhythm and with care. We have light and land and water and life. Each movement, God pauses not to evaluate its efficiency or its productivity, but to just simply name its goodness. A bird is good because a bird is good, right? My wife, oh, God bless her, she's become a real birder over the past couple of years, and I'm learning a lot of birds because of that. But I can't hold on to how much beauty is in a bird the way that she can. But a bird has never built me anything. Water is good because water is good. Sunsets are good because sunsets are pretty good, especially that one right over there. He doesn't stop to evaluate its efficiency or its productivity, just to name its goodness. Genesis would have been shocking to ancient audiences because almost all other creation stories began with violence. Genesis begins with speaking into chaos. And sometimes when I'm getting playful, maybe like Aslan, singing the world into being. Let us make humans in our image according to our likeness. So God created humans in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Humanity, all of us, every single one of us, is made in God's image. Not to dominate, but to reflect God's goodness. Dominion in Genesis is not about domination, it's about stewardship. It's a cooperative care for the whole earth. Genesis 2 describes humans tilling and keeping the garden, serving and protecting and cooperating. God's world is meant to reflect shalom, wholeness, mutuality, and flourishing. Humanity at peace with God, at peace with one another, and at peace with creation. So in Genesis, I want us to pay attention at the very beginning of the story that order arises from trust, not fear. Order arises from trust, not fear. Before law, there's gift. Before commandment, there's abundance. Before obedience, there is belonging. Too often by the same voices that promote a specific way to see Christianity, Scripture is read to justify control and order. But Genesis shows us that God's design begins not with enforcement of rules, but with an invitation to relationship. And God saw all that he made, and behold, it was very good. Every story has what you might call a catalyst or an inciting incident. In Genesis 3, the change in the story is small, but it's powerful. The serpent, the tempter, he doesn't start by saying God isn't real. The problem is hardly ever atheism. The problem isn't about believing God, it's about trusting God. Did God really say? Wish I had a sound effect for that. Shh, that'd be cool. Did God really say? This lie isn't just about acknowledging truth, it's about control. Like, what if God is holding out on you? What if? What if all that goodness that we just talked about, that's not real? What if you must take what you need rather than wait to receive it? Trust gives way to grasping. And openness gives way to hiding, and the consequences show up immediately. Shame and fear and blame. Good thing we've gotten rid of those. Well, the woman you gave me, Adam, the serpent tricked me. No one takes responsibility and everyone protects themselves. And that's how every good fight is, right? I need us to note something, though. Genesis 3 describes a wound, not a design. This is a wound, not a design. But history has twisted that repeatedly, where broken relationships have been treated as divine intention. Like women are declared less because of this wound, and exploitation because of this wound, and hierarchy is defended because of this wound. This is a wound. This is not the design. This scripture has been used to control instead of heal. But Genesis 1 through 2, it quietly insists repeatedly that this is not the way creation was supposed to be. This is the story of a wounded creation. And pretty soon, the fracture does not stay private, because it never does. In Genesis 4, Cain and Abel, brothers, they both bring their offerings. Abel's is accepted, while Cain feels ignored. And Cain's struggle has been and always will be a deeply human one. But rather than bringing his pain to his brother, rather than bringing his pain before God or speaking to anyone, he turns inward. And God warns him, sin is crouching at the door, but you must master it. But Cain does not, and for the first time, violence enters the human story. And it comes with denial. Am I my brother's keeper? Am I my brother's keeper? We've been asking this question for generations. Am I my brother's keeper? We're asking it over and over, and we still ask it, and we reach for all types of stories to let us say no. And when harm follows, Cain's pattern returns. Denial, deflection, and protecting systems instead of caring for broken lives. This question never changes, but the stories that we choose to dodge it often do. So much so that by the time we get to Cain's descendant, Lamech, violence is no longer tragic. It's celebrated. I have killed a man for wounding me, Lamech boasts. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then my revenge is 77-fold. Violence is no longer mourned in the story. It's celebrated as strength. When a culture begins to celebrate retaliation, to confuse fear with safety, and justify harm as protection, it has embraced Lamech's logic. More violence will save us. Better lies will protect us. That safety comes from force, and truth becomes whatever keeps the tower standing. And by Genesis 6, the verdict is clear: the earth was filled with violence. Now, the flood story is really interesting, and there's a lot of fun details that we could talk about, but we don't have time for that. We're trying to move on, right? I want you to know this, though. This is the simple cheat code for the flood story. The flood story in Genesis is not about God losing control. It shows what happens when human systems spiral unchecked. prioritizing the iron laws of the world, strength and force and power. And still, God chooses preservation. After the flood, God makes a covenant not just with humans, but with all creation. And so we reach the climax of our story for the day. Genesis 11 brings the story to its peak. And I have some good news. Humanity has finally come together. But not in trust or in love, but in fear. Let us build a city and make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered. In other words, let's make a brand so strong that God becomes optional. He could be on the packaging, though. Babel shows a familiar biblical pattern. Human beings building their own kingdoms out of fear, seeking unity through control rather than trust. These human-made systems are built on narratives of fear, narratives of self-interest, and the desire for certainty. The desire to have those tidy boxes that every person can fit in, or at least I can put them into. And of course, this silences and dominates and excludes others while promising safety and order and greatness for others. Systems built on fear need something. They need someone. Systems built on fear will always need a scapegoat to blame in order to feel secure. They confuse cruelty with resolve and speak peace even as they prepare for war. It promises that control of borders or narratives or rivals will finally make us safe. And it is a story so desperate that it tries to force itself into being whenever it can. Which should give us pause while reflecting again on the concept of worldview. We humans have a tendency to rebuild Babel, but not with bricks, with our beliefs, with the stories that we tell. Airtight frameworks that claim the total truth, that leave no room for humility and insist we already understand everything the way God does. The work is done. It's faith as a fortress, not a journey. And these systems insist on obedience, certainty, and a single correct way of seeing the world. And they always turn out just right. Empires never announce themselves as evil. They promise order and certainty and safety, but unity without trust always requires exclusion. God is not in the business of exclusion. They tell stories of us versus them, of innocent past and dangerous outsiders. They demand unquestioning loyalty, calling curiosity betrayal and critique disloyalty. They offer the comfort of the scapegoat, simplifying our fear by sacrificing truth and human dignity for the illusion of control. Throughout history, this has been the fundamental logic of humankind. We keep making the same journey around the same cul-de-sac, hoping that we're going to find our way back out. This logic has justified conquest and hierarchy and exploitation, all in God's name. And Genesis exposes this pattern at its root. Genesis 11, 8 through 9 says, "So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all earth." God's response is not destruction, it's dispersion. Scattered them, right? Humanity is scattered and their language is confused. This scattering is not a punishment, it is a mercy. What more would they do? God is rescuing humanity from a future built on their fear. It's a good thing we don't have a way to just hear everything everybody says all the time anymore. I think we need a little bit of confusion. Babel is God insisting that humanity cannot build a world without trust, without humility, and without a shared sense of responsibility for each other and for our planet. We are not in the business of making a name for ourselves. Genesis 1 through 11 leaves us with two competing stories. God's story of shalom, rooted in trust and gift and shared care. And humanity's story of grasping, built on fear and rivalry and control. And even our religion can serve either of these stories. Faith can teach us to trust God or give us a God that exists to defend our towers. But the Bible does not begin with condemnation. And the Bible does not begin with rules. It begins with invitation. Faith is not having all the right answers. Faith is trusting God enough to live without domination over ourselves, over others, over truth, over outcomes. Faith is not wrestling certainty to the ground. Here's the good news. If any of this sounds familiar, I don't know if you've read a history book, turned on a TV in the last 100 years, or however long TV has been around. This is our problem. This is the diagnosis. This isn't about one thing. This isn't about right now. This is about all the time. This is our sickness. And God promises to not respond to our collapse with abandonment. After the fall, God asks, "Where are you?" He comes looking. After Cain, God protects him. He puts a mark on him. After the flood, God promises restoration and a sign. And after Babel, God begins again. The story of Genesis is so very much begin again. Okay, try again. Okay, try again. Okay, maybe this time. We seem pretty stuck. And the thing that I want us to acknowledge is that God's faithfulness is not coercive. God does not force his way. God's faithfulness is not coercive, but it is always restorative. There are changes. We are called into something, right? Take everything I've said today, take out of whatever story that you've been talking in your imagination, just take that down to your story. How do you function this way? How does fear and distrust and disloyalty, how are you compelled by that today? It doesn't have to be these big systems. We always bump up against systems, and that's good work. But sometimes it's just us. Sometimes I'm the bully in my house. Where do I need to be restored? Because maybe I need to start there before I can go trying to fix the world. Or maybe it's both and. Next week, we'll see how God's story begins again. Not with an empire, but with a family. But where does that leave us off today? I would pose this question: where is God inviting you to resist a script that's written by fear? What do I mean by that? Maybe it's just stop. Refuse to believe that the world is divided into heroes and villains. Because on any day, I can be both of those things. And I know some of you pretty well to say the same thing. Maybe it's questioning dominance as it's sold as protection. And again, there are big ways to see that, and there are little ways to see that. How do I respond to my kids when they don't do exactly what I expected them to do? Because that happens every day, most of the day. The same time every day. It's bedtime. It's bedtime. It's bedtime. And some days you're like, ah! And sometimes it's in grieving the fact that we don't have as much control as we want, and we never will. And fighting for control that we won't have probably isn't the best way to exercise our faith. Shalom is not avoiding conflict. We are not called to avoid conflict, but within ourselves, within each other, or within our world. But we are called to refuse to let fear tell the story. Like in the beginning, it trusts that a word spoken into chaos is truer than the story that begins with any threat. A word of truth spoken into chaos is more true, more beautiful, and more holy than any story that begins with a threat. Church, God's question remains the same, though, this morning. Hey, where are you? Where are you in the story? Where are you today if God came looking? Not to shame you, that's not the point, but to invite you. The story of Genesis 1 through 11 leaves us with two truths. We are made for shalom. We're made for peace with God, with each other, with this world. And yet we keep drifting towards our own self-made kingdoms. But God never stops seeking. May we have the courage to trust God's faithfulness again and to step into a better story, the story that saves.